All right, it's the Security Weekly News wrap-up for the week of 24 April 2022. We got Owl Grease, Docker, Nimbuspwn. I don't know if it's Nimbuspwn or Nimbuspwn. Whatever. Edge, Emotet, NPM, all this and show wrap-ups on the Security Weekly News.
This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Monitoring and maintaining compliance is a never-ending struggle with a high price of failure. Firemon helps customers meet complex and varying compliance requirements. Firemon has fully customizable reporting, analytics, assessments, and dashboards to meet the compliance needs of any organization. With Firemon, compliance reports take 1/10 of the time, and real-time continuous compliance eliminates the anxiety and headaches of audit preparation. Improve security outcomes by improving security operations with Firemon. Visit securityweekly.com/Firemon to learn more. Cybercriminals are working overtime. Last year in the fourth quarter alone, phishing attacks disguised as COVID testing information increased by 521%. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Find out about the 13 email threat types and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
All right, I'm Doug White, and this is Security Weekly News Wrap-Up Show, episode 208. How about that? On Application Security Weekly this week, number 194, John and Mike had Xinxi Wang on the show, and Xinxi is the managing general partner at Rain Capital. Dr. Wang was on to talk about how companies can set their developers up for security success, the importance of implementing micro-learnings, and what should CISO expectations be of developers and what should developers expect from their CISOs. And also, how should corporate boards be aware of implications of developers' pervasive development in software security and how they could maybe work together someday? Interesting. It was an interesting segment. I mean, definitely check it out. It's all that stuff that you want to do, but people don't seem to do very well, so maybe it's worth watching. In the second segment, the AppSec News. On Business Security Weekly, number 260, Ben, Jason, and Matt had Jess Byrne on the show. Jess is the senior analyst at Forrester Research and was on to talk about Forrester's 8 security program recommendations for 2022, which were big bullets: how to resolve perennial problems, how to take on new issues as they arise, and so forth. So worth checking that one out, comparing up your security organization. And in the second segment, the business security news. On Enterprise Security Weekly 270, Adrian, Larry, and Tyler Shields had Rich Mogul, the Senior Vice President for Cloud Security at Firemon, on the show. Rich was on to talk about cloud security, which everybody's talking about now, and how with the complex landscape of products that you have today, it's definitely going to be hard to secure everything. And as you it bleeds over into the cloud. I mean, I like that term fog that they use. As your enterprise bleeds into the cloud, it's definitely going to be a little tricky, and as we've seen. They did talk about how to make sense out of all this and where you can maybe find some things that will actually help you to understand it, visualize it, and so forth. In the second segment, Andrew Hindle, the content chair at Identiverse and the chair of ID Pro at Identiverse, joined the show to talk about digital identity. So a big deal. And how digital identity is going to be the modern security architecture key. Some questions like, how do you enable privacy-preserving trusted services and so forth? How can you make the most of things like passwordless, verified credentials, and personal identity going forward? So a lot of stuff there to unpack, worth checking out. And in the third segment, the enterprise security news. On Security Weekly News, number 207, Jason Wood was on to talk about the return of Emotet. And how Emotet has evolved down through the years, certainly. And I had another story about Emotet as well. On Paul's Security Weekly, number 738, Wednesday night, the show apparently did survive me hosting it. So it was not canceled and or banned on all continents or anything like that. So they did survive that. But Paul was back. They first up had Michael Aminoff, the founder and chief architect at Perception Point. Michael was on talking about cyber attack trends, email security, and the threat of cloud collaboration. So again, that same sort of context. They also talked about content-borne attacks. They also had some use cases on there that had like challenges and deployments that they were using in those use cases. So a pretty interesting thing to check out. In the second segment, Marcus Sachs, the Deputy Director for Research at the McCrary Institute for Cyber and Critical Infrastructure Security at Auburn University. In fact, I used to know you're one of the deans there, but I think he left. But at Auburn, Marcus was on talking about his cryptography collection, working for the U.S. Army and the U.S. government, and as well, they had some talk about antique typewriters and some things like that, and Japanese typewriters as well. If you've ever seen like a Chinese character, I've never seen a Japanese one, but I've seen Chinese character typewriters and things like that. They're pretty interesting things indeed. And in the third segment, the security news. Well, my threat of the week is going to be Docker. Now, don't get me wrong. I love Docker. I mean, I really do. And I love the idea of containers because, you know, that really ends up being the delivery of that old object-oriented promise of being able to reproduce things, to be able to reuse things, persistence, encapsulation, and all that stuff. And, you know, the first time I really saw something that I felt like captured that what they were originally talking about back in the 80s about object-oriented really seemed like Docker. You know, the ability that you could spin up an instance of something that is ephemeral and then spin it down when you don't need it anymore. You know, the definition of ephemeral, essentially. But, I mean, the idea that you could have all these objects and that they could be reused at will and that they went away when you no longer needed them. I mean, yeah, conceptually that stuff existed in programming ideas, but this really took it to that. I don't know. It really started to feel real to me when I started seeing Dockers. I mean, the whole idea of a Gestalt development environment with lambdas, containers, et cetera, is like a programmer's daydream from the 1980s. I mean, I love playing with this stuff and using them for development. I mean, when I need something now, there's probably already a Docker that's built for it, something that does it out there in the world. And I know I said this was a threat. I'll talk about what I see as a threat in a second, but I mean, you know, I'm obviously praising Docker to the high heavens because I do love this so much. I mean, the other day I needed a bot, so I was doing an experiment. I wanted a bot. Voila, there it is. You know, I didn't have to sit down and start installing libraries and packaging things and coding things and so forth. I mean, I literally downloaded a fully built-out instance of Linux with a built-in bot space that had all the trimmings that was ready for development of the bot in just. It took probably like 8 minutes because I had to download some different packages, to pull to do the whole pull. Part of it was, you know, a full Linux environment. I mean, it was really cool. And, you know, you need to do a sophisticated calculation. There's probably a Lambda laying around somewhere that you can actually use for that purpose, but or you can put one together real quick and then it's there forever. But, I mean, as I was working on the bot, and it's certainly not a flaw with Docker in any way, I did start thinking about what the hell is in this thing. I mean, who built it? Is the code okay? I mean, like, mine isn't for production, so it doesn't really matter because I'm just going to use it for experimental purposes in a controlled environment. But, I mean, how experimental, how can that experimental code suddenly have a nasty tendency to get put into production? You know, like when some upper management person sees this experimental thing I was playing with and goes, why aren't we using that? And then all of a sudden somebody goes, we are using it, sir. We are using it right now. And they grab it and put it, and it's in production a week there. And I start getting nervous that maybe my little fun bot could turn into a serious bot and then it turns into Skynet or something. And then Skynet gets hacked by some 12-year-old kid because there was a hole in the code somewhere. But I mean, that led me to my real concern. My real concern is that what if that Docker pull has problems in it? What if it's got lambdas, APIs, and all this kind of stuff that even if they don't have problems, what if they change? What if they go away? What if they're not secure? All those things really made me start thinking that maybe we are going to have to develop a mechanism. And it's not that it's undoable, it's just very daunting. But to develop full assessments of these things in order not to get got by things we didn't even think of. I mean, when I used to develop code for the bank, Every single piece of code was completely flowcharted. It was completely analyzed. It was put through Q&A, all that in dev, and then it went into a book. And then the prod, when they did it, there was a person who approved it going into production. It wasn't me. I mean, I could send it over to her, and then she looked at the code and decided if it was going to get pushed into production or not. And that was a process. I mean, I spent all this time playing with self scripts with this bot, and I really didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about what was in that Docker and that could it be compromised. Maybe it was compromised already because I just downloaded it. I saw a link to it. I was like, oh, this will work. And then, I don't know. I mean, and it could fail too, right? If there's something changes in the base packages or whatever and breaks it. I mean, all of us deal with that all the time. I mean, I don't even know what all the packages are in that thing because I didn't take the time to go sit down and go through it. I'm sure it's documented, but for all I know, and it's not exposed, this thing may be running the evil empire malware strike that's targeting the federal government or something, and I'm just like, yeah, I'll turn it on. Cool, let's play. But I mean, it did make me start to worry because, like I say, when I developed live code, I was very worried about deadlines and promise deliveries and so forth. And I was not as worried about good quality code and testing since I had to deliver this by this afternoon because, marketing promised that, and that drill. So Docker made this whole OO thing come alive to me, and it's really awesome. But I do think we need to start thinking about how do we build mechanisms that are going to be used for end-to-end testing on all these things, especially as it expands, again, bleeds over into this fog, and we want to be sure this stuff's not filled with dependent code and APIs that haven't been tested, and the next thing you know, you're living in the woods with no electricity eating a boiled squirrel. I mean, that's how you get there. So we do need to think about this. And this modern approach to this kind of development is proliferating every nook and cranny of all the application code that's being developed now. I mean, it's just, because why would you reinvent the wheel? I mean, if you're a programmer and you need a bot for a website, why do you need to redevelop the entire thing from scratch when there's a dozen pieces of this laying down in Dockers that can be spun up and spun down as they're needed? And, wow. So I do think this is going to start to be very haunting as we've already seen with all the supply chain attacks. But in the very near future, I think there's going to be more and more of this. And I do think it's going to get weaponized. I think people are going to start weaponizing things like Dockers. They're going to start weaponizing things. And again, that's no flaw of Docker because anybody can develop new Docker containers and put them out there. And so why not evil nation states putting out containers that are volatile and ransomware companies putting out containers that contain ransomware and just hoping people will download them. I mean, it's right back to that old My Super Cool Star Trek program that's really just an executable that's got malware in it, right? Anyway, now the news. Nimbuspwn is a collection of vulnerabilities that can allow escalation of privileges on Linux-based systems. So Microsoft, imagine that, issued the report. Although their lab is so good, I mean, they do really great work, and they do work on their own stuff too. But they issued this report that said that chaining this collection of vulnerabilities together can allow the attacker to achieve root on the system. Both of the vulnerabilities that they described were found in Network D Dispatcher, which is a tool that is on a lot of Linux systems that sends connection status changes to the system. The collection of vulnerabilities involves directory traversal, symlink races, time of check, time of use race conditions. All those are, I mean, those vary from easy to not so easy kind of stuff to do. So it may not be that it's that easy to put this together, but anyway, Network D Dispatcher runs as root typically on most Linux systems, and if you can chain these three things together, essentially you can achieve root privilege for a specific signal that's sent running as root. It did seem a little esoteric, but you might want to take a look at it and look at all the details in the article. Or the Microsoft report, which is also linked in the article, which has the proof of concept. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, here's, they've got all the grim details there. Edge, it's not just a way to install Chrome anymore. Well, it kind of is, but this new article states that Microsoft is working, and apparently this is not out in like production yet, but Microsoft is working on a built-in VPN functionality in Edge, which will be called the Edge Secure Network. And the Edge Secure Network apparently is going to be powered by Cloudflare. The article says they're sort of saying this is not so great. I don't exactly agree with them, but they said this is not a full-fledged VPN service. I don't agree with that because, and I mean, it's not that I'm defending Microsoft or Edge or anything else or Cloudflare, or I'm not even criticizing them. I don't really agree with you that this is not a full-fledged VPN service. And I'll tell you why in a second. But basically, all of us are probably already using VPNs. I mean, I use them on my phone. I use them on my desktop computer. They're pretty much built into just about everything. But apparently, the reason they don't like this is that they're making a VPN available to you that you won't see, that is seamless, and it doesn't have any maintenance or setups or anything like that. But what happens is, because you can't control the endpoint, they're calling it not a full-fledged VPN. I was like, really? It seems like it's still a VPN even if you can't control where the endpoint is set. I mean, can you control the endpoint on lots of VPNs? Really? I mean, you can build them yourself, I guess, but I mean, you know, except for these anonymizer VPNs, and even those are VPNs. I mean, it's still a VPN. But anyway, the Edge VPN Alpha they were discussing encrypts your traffic. It routes all your DNS through 1.1.1.1, which is Cloudflare, but it doesn't let you set the endpoint. So, I mean, okay. So, I mean, I guess it's all about your purpose for this, right? It does encrypt all your stuff through your ISP and maybe through government monitoring if you're allowed to do that. And I mean, honestly, if your main reason for using a VPN is to get streaming from other places, like illegally in violation of service agreement, not that I've ever done that, but I mean, is that really the reason you're using a VPN, so you can get around streaming services that black stuff out? I mean, they say that that's the big limitation of this. I mean, I think we've all used VPNs at some point to pretend to be somewhere else. I mean, I know in China we were doing that because we wanted to watch Netflix, and Netflix was banned in China, so we connected the VPN, put the endpoint in London, and we were able to watch Netflix again. I mean, I don't know. I was really kind of put off by that. But I mean, I'm not the trusting type, so I would probably run my own VPN through their VPN anyway, because I worry about them controlling the endpoint. So if I run my VPN through their automatic VPN, even if they're monitoring the endpoint, my VPN's got a different endpoint. So I've out VPN'd the VPNers. I mean, I don't really think letting Microsoft control the endpoint and the data there is something that's going to get people to suddenly start using Edge. But considering that 3/4 of the population probably can't spell VPN and don't know what it really is, it's just marketing, you know, getting you to want things you don't need. I can see it now. Edge, now edgier than ever with all new advanced AI enhanced VPN for that fresh, minty feeling that everything is going to be okay. Also available in vacant flavor. Side effects may include shortness of breath, open sores, blurry vision, or death. Yeah. Well, if you listen to Jason's commentary on Tuesday, well, he talked about the return of Emotet. And Emotet's been around a long time, and it's one of my, I like the name. It just sounds cool. But I mean, apparently they've recently revamped it again, and it's now an all new and improved AI enhanced version of it. No, it doesn't really have AI, at least, well, not yet. But I don't know what the marketing materials for Emotet says. But Emotet is one of the most popular modular mechanisms for spreading malware of all sorts, and it has been for years. The only reason I included this article was because Japan CERT released a tool called Emo Check, which actually sounds like it probably should do something else, like figure out who is goth or something. But it actually is a tool that will detect that Emotet is on your machine. And it was originally released back in 2020, but Emotet has since moved on. And Emotet has now become 64-bit code, and the old Emo Check thing from way back when can now only be used to detect goths and will no longer detect Emotet if it's running in a 64-bit version. But this new Japan CERT version is supporting 64-bit code. It's a free utility that you can download from Japan CERT's GitHub if you're interested in it. Currently, Emotet installs itself in a random folder, which is under C:\users/user, whatever the username is, /appdata/local. It's just sort of this pseudo hidden directory tree on Windows. And it is a DLL that gets put in, and it has a random extension, anything except DLL. They do have instructions on that GitHub for cleaning up if you have determined that you have Emotet. So if you have Emotet problems or you just want to explore this Emo Check tool, there you go. NPM registry contained a logical flaw that allowed a package owner to add anyone and any number of anyones to their packages as maintainers without anybody having to agree to such things or even knowing they've been added. This basically allowed malicious package owners to add a lot of maintainers to their packages to make them look legit. Not that we've ever seen that before. The flaw was named package planting, so that's what they started calling it, or package poisoning. And basically, it allowed the developer to add anybody they wanted to the package without having them be notified. And I mean, it is the kind of stuff that you look for when you look at packages. It's like looking at reviews. How many people were involved in the package? How many people are maintaining it? I mean, it's kind of like those reviews where it's painfully obvious that 99% of the reviews were probably written by bots or a warehouse full of people that don't necessarily speak English. Because like I saw one once. Every single review, I mean, the reviews were all different. It'd be like, my husband bought this, but every single one had the phrase "scarce as hen's teeth" in it. Literally. I mean, I'm not making it up. There were like 1,500 reviews in that product, and about 3/4 of the reviews I was flipping through them said something like, "Products this good are as scarce as hen's teeth." And I honestly had to ask my mother what it meant. I mean, she said it meant that it was unusual because chickens apparently don't have teeth. I never got close enough to a chicken to tell you if it had teeth or not, but it did make me want to genetically engineer a chicken with lots of teeth. But my mother said that would be wrong. But I digress. Anyway, the example they provided showed that developer publishing a test package, and then they added Facebook and NPM to the list of maintainers, and then removed their own name from it, so you couldn't see who originally developed it. So apparently the issue's been repaired on NPM, but you want to keep this in mind when you shop for anything, but if you're looking for packages, be careful that you take a look at some of the supporters and make sure that it's legit. I know it's more work to roll your own code, but damn, those packages are easy and fun, right? I mean, look at this one's being maintained by Microsift. It must be okay. And if you don't know, Microsift used to be a notorious porn site. I don't think it exists anymore. Because the I and the O are close together. Yeah, so people type Microsift all the time. Anyway, since I was just talking about hen's teeth as well, this article had something, to lead it off that really got on my nerves a little bit. Not like a lot of stuff. Here's the quote from the beginning of this article. Even if you're not a native English speaker, you've probably heard the curious saying, "It's a bit of a curate's egg." I'm going to let that land for a second. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I have been around a bit, and I've been around a while, and I've spoken English all of my life. That was what I learned. And my mother used a lot of these kind of sayings, like slicker than owl grease. And my friend Lou, he screwed up all these things all the time, saying stuff like, "It's colder than a bat's earlobe covered in owl grease." And you're like, what does that even mean, Lou? All those kind of things. But never have I ever in all my life heard anyone say, "It's a bit of a curate's egg." I know what struth means, and I've watched more BBC than a lot of Americans, but I have never, ever heard anyone say this in England or the United States or in any other country where English was actually being spoken. But apparently, and I could be wrong here, I was shocked because they were like, most even non-native English speakers have heard this expression. Apparently, it's from a 19th century, yes, 19th century British cartoon called Punch. But according to the author, it's still a popular expression. The phrase means something that's kind of good and kind of bad. And there's actually a copy of the cartoon in the article. And he was referring to the 2022 ransomware report. Honestly, this author obviously went to better schools than I did, and then had to spend a page and a half of the article explaining the joke, which usually, and I'm well aware of this, means it's not that great of a joke. And so a page and a half into it, explaining this cartoon from 1895, we finally get to the Sophos ransomware survey for 2022, which was being described as like the curate's egg. In this report, 2/3 of the 5,500 participants worldwide said they had a ransomware infection in 2021, which was way up from 2019, where only a half of them said that. But the good news, the proverbial nice bits in the curate's egg, was that 1/3 of the victims managed to prevent any serious disaster, and 1/2 of those who were compromised did not pay up. So I guess the point of all that was that it was, basically good and bad news, so like the curate's egg in the cartoon. But the top tips from the story were, wait for these, ensure high-quality defenses at all points in your environment, proactively hunt for threats so you can stop adversaries before they can execute their attack, Harden your environment by searching for and closing down security gaps such as unpatched devices, unprotected computers, insecure remote access servers. Prepare for the worst. Make backups and practice restoring from them. So, a bland but good set of advice. What a skeezix, to quote a famous cartoon from another era. Or as my mother would have said, I think that writer was as tight as old Dick's hat band. Yeah, she actually said stuff like that. We still talk about that one. That actually means you were really, really drunk, is what that means, if you didn't know. Anyway, you can avoid Facebook, but you can't avoid Meta. When students apply for financial aid in the modern age, they go to a site to fill out a form called a FAFSA. So if you've gone to college and say the last 20 years, you probably filled out a FAFSA form, because even if you're going to pay for it in cash, you still fill out FAFSAs because they tell you to. And it's a standard federal form for financial aid in the United States, because unlike most of the rest of the world, we don't have free school. You have to pay for it. I know people have to pay for it in Europe too, but not the students. It's like, the tax dollars pay for it or something. But anyway, in an investigation by The Markup, a metapixel was found on the FAFSA website. Now, metapixels are used for targeting and tracking activity by placing a little tiny pixel marker on the page that can then be tracked. So basically, it allows the reverse tracking of data that's been hashed on the page back to the device that produced a hash. So essentially what they would be able to do is tell which device was looking for or filling out this FAFSA form, later. And they track this little metapixel thing. Apparently, the Markup contacted the U.S. Department of Ed and did not receive a reply, but the code suddenly disappeared from the page. Now, before you panic and move to a shack in the Great Woods and eat boiled squirrels, millions of sites have these, and they are typically used to track machines and then cause pop-up ads on those machines. So they can see that you went to this site, and they put up an ad that relates to that site. But it does mean that the government was allowing Meta to pop up or put this metapixel on their FAFSA site and track students who are applying for loans. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg commented, "Did I do that?" And Elon Musk said he would buy all the metapixels, all of them, and work them in the mines until they died. Then he said, maybe I'll just see what happens if I bombard these snapping turtles with gamma radiation until they mutate. I love you, Elon. Come on. Send me that Tesla X you promised. Really. The one with the carbon fiber wheels. I've mentioned that multiple times now, and I've still not gotten it. And finally, 2001, 24 years late, a company called Orbital Assembly Corporation has announced plans to develop a space business park, like in 2001, A Space Odyssey. And they said in the article that it would have artificial gravity. I immediately went, really? It's going to have artificial gravity. I wonder if they're going to have inertial dampers too. Or is everybody just going to go back and forth when stuff happens like they do on Star Trek? But apparently the business park will accommodate 28 guests in 5 modules around a rotating ring, which is the gravity they're talking about, which is not artificial, mind you. That's just gravity. You don't have to call it artificial gravity if it's actually just gravity. You rotate the ring, that's just gravity. Yeah, that's how gravity works. It's not artificial. If you got artificial gravity, I'd like to know about it. I'll invest. But the station is called Pioneer, and it's one of 2 designs being developed. They hope to have the first station, Pioneer, operational by 2025. The other one's called Voyager, but they didn't have a date on when that was going to be. It does sound expensive, and they haven't raised that much money yet. It said they'd only raised like $1 million. NASA awarded over $400 million to 3 different companies that were hoping to build orbital stations in the coming decade. I'm guessing low Earth orbit is pretty soon going to look like Miami Beach. Who knows? Anyway, that's the wrap-up for the week of 24 April 2022. I'm Doug White, and I'll see you next week on the Security Weekly News.